It was a day where the harsh summer sun still shone strongly. I received a call from my nearby living son, Ethan. He said he'd like me to come over for Caleb's birthday. Our grandson, Caleb, is celebrating his birthday. Caleb is only 5 years old, so celebrating his birthday is quite meaningful. Holding the gift my husband, Robert, and I picked out, I headed over to Ethan's house and rang the doorbell. Upon answering the door, the first thing Ethan did was gesture with his chin, implying that I should prepare some dishes for the party. Suppressing my feelings, I prepared some dishes using the ingredients available in their house for Caleb, today's birthday boy. After arranging them on the dining table, thinking of making it colorful, just as I finished setting up, Ethan's wife, Sarah, spoke up. "We're expecting friends soon, so this is enough." I wasn't sure what she meant by that, but following her statement, Ethan, chuckling, told me to just leave the gift and head home quickly. Feeling embarrassed, I merely looked down, unsure how to act in front of Robert. As for Robert, he observed the couple's arrogant behavior for a while, but eventually whispered, "Guess this will be the last time." People often talk about the importance of education, but I dropped out of high school. I've never been ashamed of dropping out of high school, nor have I regretted not going to college. However, I am aware that society has a particularly harsh perception of it. To be honest, my husband, Robert, not only graduated from a graduate school but also studied abroad, truly a top-tier guy. Robert never judges me based on education, but some folks and relatives mentioned our mismatched educational backgrounds, making me feel guilty. However, Robert never paid any mind to those outside opinions and kept showering me with love, teaching me that real elites don't judge solely based on titles. Granted, it might just be Robert's exceptional nature, but after marrying him, we were blessed with a son named Ethan. I believed parenting was a joint effort, but due to strong requests from Robert's parents, they often took care of Ethan. Around that time, Robert, being busy with his business, I felt reluctant to burden him. Gratefully accepting their offer is something I regret to this day. It's as if Ethan had two sets of parents, a structure that negatively impacted his upbringing. When we cared for him, we disciplined him to be honest, but Robert's parents spoiled him. By the time we realized, Ethan had developed a very arrogant and selfish attitude. He became someone who was reluctant to face challenges, wanted to dominate others, and looked down on them based on his own biased standards. Perhaps not seeing his busy father, Robert, frequently played a role in Ethan's attitude. It became most evident after Ethan graduated from grad school. He began openly disrespecting me due to my educational background. But I knew not everyone was like Ethan, having seen Robert's kindness. Thanks to that, I never let Ethan's words hurt me. Still, I worried that Ethan's attitude would drive people away. I considered discussing it with Robert, but figured Ethan wouldn't change unless something major occurred. However, setting aside such concerns, Ethan experienced his own spring. The year after graduating from graduate school, he joyfully informed us that he was considering marriage. The lady in question is an elegant woman named Sarah, who, he mentioned, has been a friend since high school. Dressed in luxury brands, her elegance caught our eye. They decided not to have a wedding, so we gifted them a lavish photo shoot at a studio. A token from us wishing to celebrate their new journey. Sarah, like me, had dropped out of high school. However, Ethan never looked down on her in the way some might have with me. I was greatly pleased, thinking that this change in his attitude indicated his growth and maturity. However, I was soon to realize that wasn't the case. Shortly after they began their married life, while I was cleaning my house, Sarah called. Apparently, their vacuum cleaner wasn't working, and she wanted me to look at it. I suppressed my initial thought that they could have easily called the manufacturer and decided to head over for my daughter-in-law's sake. Upon arriving at my son and his wife's high-rise apartment in downtown New York, I was directed by the concierge to their room. When Sarah opened the door, both she and a child were inside. I felt a little surprised seeing the child I hadn't met during our initial meeting. Assuming it might be a relative's child they were babysitting, I didn't mention it. The reason I was called was to check on their malfunctioning vacuum. When I opened it up, the filter was completely clogged. While replacing it, I thought, surely they know about changing filters, and just like that, the vacuum started working fine again. "Oh, thank you so much," Sarah exclaimed as she noticed the vacuum humming back to life. "It wasn't really broken," I explained. "The filter was just full." I showed her the clogged filter. Sarah looked genuinely surprised, as if she'd never seen such a thing before. "I didn't know vacuums could get like that," she said. For a moment, I wondered if she was joking. However, glancing around, I noticed laundry haphazardly hung up and tablecloths wrinkled. I realized that Sarah might not be very good with household chores, an impression I hadn't gotten when we first met. Thinking I might be called upon again for such basic household matters, I decided to give Sarah a brief rundown. "Sarah," I began. "About the vacuum filter." "Oh, when it gets full again, can you take care of it?" she interrupted. I was taken aback by her casual attitude, but Sarah continued. "Ethan told me that if there's any trouble, I should just get you to handle it." I was speechless. Ethan has always looked down on me, but I never imagined that even his wife, Sarah, would treat me like a maid. There's no doubt in my mind he's been saying this. Maybe I was the one who was too caught up in judging people based on their education, thinking Ethan had matured just because he married a woman without a college degree. I felt ashamed of my foolishness. From then on, whenever Sarah felt too lazy to cook or didn't feel like doing chores, she'd take advantage of Ethan and call me. And Ethan, instead of taking care of the household chores himself for Sarah, would summon me as a matter of course to finish all the household tasks at their home. If I ever got a call from Ethan in the evening, it was usually to hear, "Make dinner and clean up." Or, "I'd like something American tonight." Which meant shopping and preparation, a task that was often burdensome. There was a time when I was asked to babysit and found out that the child I had seen at Ethan's house before was Caleb, Sarah's 5-year-old son from her previous marriage. I wasn't told at our initial meeting, but it seems Sarah had been married and had a child before meeting Ethan. Not wanting to probe into their past, I just did as I was told. Caleb didn't seem too interested in interacting with others, often keeping himself busy with drawing or playing with toys. So babysitting wasn't a big deal. But the frequency of these calls was the real problem. I have my own plans and commitments, but I was summoned day and night. If I ever got there late, I'd get an earful, so little by little, my life began to revolve around Ethan and Sarah. And it wasn't just my household chores with Robert, but I was also saddled with chores at Ethan's house every time they called. I began to feel a fatigue that sleep alone couldn't cure. I didn't want to worry Robert, who was busy with his role as a company CEO, so I tried home exercises and self-massages. But there's only so much an amateur can do. Then, on a summer morning with frequent broadcasts warning about smog and heat stroke risks, I felt unwell and spent an extra 30 minutes in bed. Robert, used to me waking up at the same time every day, quickly noticed and showed concern. But he wouldn't buy my excuse of just feeling a bit lightheaded. The trust between Robert and me was strong. Admitting my ailment, I gently turned down Robert's offer to accompany me to the doctor, asking instead to rest at home without doing chores for the day. However, my situation didn't stop Ethan's phone from ringing. Dragging my weary body up to answer, as usual, I was told to clean at Ethan's place and look after Caleb. Wanting to honor my promise to Robert, I told Ethan about my condition and said I couldn't come today. But Ethan, acting as if I had no right to refuse, said, "We've got an unavoidable commitment, so you better be here," and hung up without waiting for my reply. Thinking of little Caleb being left alone, I couldn't not go. Pushing through the fatigue, I headed over to Ethan's place. When I got home, Ethan and Sarah had already left. Dishes were left half-eaten, and branded clothing was scattered everywhere. With a weary body, I forced myself to clean up, letting out a sigh. But, as I finished the dishes while keeping an eye on Caleb, I started to feel increasingly nauseous. My vision slowly began to blur from the edges. Eventually, I couldn't stand any longer and collapsed in the kitchen. Caleb was coloring in the living room, but I was out of his view, lying on the floor. The only thing I could muster was a weak awareness. I couldn't even call out and just curled up helplessly. Caleb, being a focused child, would probably not look up from his coloring for a while. I tried hard to move, thinking if I could just drink some water, but I couldn't get up. The more I strained, the worse I felt. My consciousness began to fade, and at some point, I thought I'd finally be at peace. Then, the front doorbell rang, and Robert entered the room. Seeing me, he gently picked me up. Concerned, he said to Caleb, "I'm gonna take your grandma home, okay? You'll be all right by yourself?" Caleb, though worried, nodded. Robert took me to his house, hydrated me, and carried me to bed. Apparently, on top of already being unwell, I had gotten dehydrated due to accumulated fatigue. With shallow breaths, I managed to tell Robert, "I'm so sorry for being a burden." He shook his head silently, squeezing my hand. Before heading to Ethan's house, I was glad I'd quickly informed Robert. I had promised to rest at home, but going out felt like betraying Robert's kindness. So, I'd updated him just in case. True to his word, Robert had come to pick me up from Ethan's place after wrapping up his work. And it couldn't have been more timely. Feeling safe in bed, I drifted into a deep sleep. When I woke up, it was already dinner time. Feeling rejuvenated after some rest and hydration, I headed to the kitchen to prepare dinner. To my surprise, a meal, probably prepared by Robert, was already set, just waiting to be served. Looking around, I found Robert sitting on the couch, engrossed in a magazine. Noticing I was up, he looked up and asked with concern, "You all right?" I replied with a thankful smile. "Thanks to you, yes. And thank you for preparing dinner." Chuckling, Robert said, "No problem at all." The relaxed atmosphere was heartwarming. As we finished our dinner, sitting on the sofa, Robert started. "About Ethan." Feeling the problem was no longer mine alone, I decided to open up. I explained how Sarah wasn't skilled at household chores and how Ethan kept pushing tasks onto me. The child at home was Sarah's from her previous marriage, named Caleb. Due to the responsibilities dumped on me, I often felt fatigued and couldn't manage my health properly. As I sporadically talked about my own inadequacies, Robert crossed his arms and put a hand to his chin, gesturing as if deep in thought. Unable to decipher what was on his mind, I simply waited in anticipation for his next reaction. I feared he might be disappointed in me. But when he looked at me again, his expression was calm, suggesting I stop visiting Ethan's place. From then on, I received frequent calls from Ethan, but I stopped responding. I felt sorry for Caleb, but I wasn't their housekeeper. And I couldn't overexert myself, especially after worrying my dear husband. However, after a few weeks, a different kind of message came. It was an invitation for Caleb's once-a-year birthday party. I thought I should perhaps attend. After discussing with Robert, we decided to go and celebrate together. On the day, as we reached Ethan's place, he immediately instructed me to prepare a lavish meal for the party. I was prepared for this, so I looked up some easy party recipes online and started making dishes like gratin, potato salad, and vegetable broth soup. After a while, as I laid out the colorful spread, Sarah, smiling, said, "Our friends will be here soon, you can leave now. After the cooking is done, there's no role for you." While I was declining the calls, I couldn't help but feel angered at how much their attitude had worsened, but I held back because of Caleb being there. Then, joining in with Sarah, Ethan chuckled and said, "You brought a present, didn't you? Just drop it off and leave." I felt ashamed, especially because Robert was with us today, and I looked down. On the other hand, Robert had been quietly observing the situation, and then murmured in a barely audible tone, "Well, it's gonna be the last time this year." Ethan seemed not to hear Robert's whisper and pushed me towards the exit, urging me to leave quickly. So, without celebrating Caleb's birthday directly, Robert and I left Ethan's house. Overwhelmed with guilt, I quickly apologized, but Robert firmly said, "No, it's him who's wrong," and then drove me home before heading to work. Later, he went to his office alone. Once I was alone at home, I sat down on the living room couch and soon fell asleep, unable to resist the sudden wave of fatigue. I wish I could forget the shame I caused Robert as soon as possible. A few days later, around 7 a.m., the doorbell rang, and I heard the sound of heavy footsteps. Ethan burst into the room, yelling, "Dad, what's this about me being transferred to the regional planning department?" Ethan shouted, his face reddening to the point where his veins bulged. It seemed Robert had given Ethan a transfer order. "It's the consensus of everyone." Robert responded calmly without changing his expression. The truth was, after Ethan graduated from graduate school and couldn't find a job, he joined the company run by Robert through connections. While Robert's character made it easier for the company executives to accept Ethan's employment, Ethan's work performance was unsatisfactory, causing problems for everyone. Not only was he unable to produce results, but he also often billed personal entertainment and golfing expenses to the company, causing frequent issues. Robert himself had directly warned and urged Ethan to improve several times, but Ethan was unresponsive. Seeing Ethan's unreasonable demands towards me was likely the last straw for Robert. With the company's upcoming international expansion, Robert decided that he couldn't keep Ethan in a central position any longer and decided to transfer him to a regional miscellaneous task department with the support of the executives. Robert had always believed people could change, hoping Ethan would eventually understand the importance of his work and act sincerely. He hadn't given up on him until now, but it seemed he had reached the end of his patience. It showed just how low Ethan had fallen in the eyes of both his colleagues and family. When Ethan heard the reason for his transfer from Robert and was told, "Until you cool down and repent, I won't recognize you," he began to tremble. Ethan then glared at Robert, warning, "Are you okay with never seeing your grandson again?" Referencing Caleb, but Robert didn't flinch. After all, Caleb isn't our real grandson. There's no blood connection. If my wife is ridiculed by your charmless daughter-in-law, I don't feel anything, even if I don't see them. Saying this, as if to make Ethan re-recognize what he had done to me so far, my husband began to speak calmly and started to explain the situation Ethan is in now. Firstly, the luxury condo Ethan was living in was owned by Robert. So, Robert could always check the building's security camera footage, implying that he knew how frequently Ethan was bothering me. Additionally, the car Ethan was using privately was a company car owned by Robert's company, hinting at the consequences Ethan might face. Robert said, "For someone who was merely in a privileged position given by his parents but looked down on others and didn't strive for personal growth, this isn't suitable," and told Ethan to pack up and leave. Finally realizing the gravity of the situation, Ethan began to apologize profusely. He would lose his place to live and the car he needed for mobility, so it was a natural reaction. Ethan tried desperately to apologize to Robert, tears spilling from my eyes. However, Robert is a person who is trusted by many for his ability to execute decisions as a business leader. It was clear that no amount of apologizing would change the situation. Ethan stopped apologizing and began to limp towards the entrance. Robert and I slowly followed his retreating figure. Just before the door closed, Robert sternly told Ethan, "The child is not to blame. Grow up, man." It was a few days after Ethan had been transferred to Nebraska. Ethan called me, saying he couldn't make his credit card payments on time and had racked up a lot of charges. He needed help. Apparently, Sarah had been using Ethan's card on her own to buy designer goods and expensive makeup. Naturally, it was his own doing, so neither Robert nor I paid any mind. We decided not to lend a hand until we see a real change in him. So, there's no way we could help out here. I told Ethan to figure it out on his own, then hung up the phone, letting out a sigh. He's probably just now feeling the real world's pinch, having lived off his parents for so long. Though he should have realized sooner, considering some of our faults in shaping Ethan's character, I felt a bit guilty for putting pressure on Sarah. But then again, thinking about what Sarah did to me, it's her own karma. People can find happiness through compassion and personal growth, not just by surrounding themselves with luxuries. I hope they realize that. Now that I'm no longer summoned by Ethan and his family, I've reclaimed time for myself and started a new hobby. I've been trying out various baking recipes and posting photos on social media. Every now and then, I get a positive comment that boosts my self-esteem. I feel way more fulfilled than before. Meanwhile, since Ethan's transfer to Nebraska, the previously struggling department Robert oversees has regained momentum. It's giving a significant boost to their international expansion, and business is booming. Thanks to the company's rapid growth, Robert, despite his age, has become somewhat of a celebrity in the domestic CEO community. I rejoice in Robert's success and hope that someday Ethan will have a change of heart and become as sincere a person as Robert. Robert proves there's no limit to human growth. Someday, they'll realize that it was all done out of love. When that day comes, I'll be happy to cook a meal for Ethan and his family.